Kia ora, my name is J.D. Let's read a book. This is a Canticle of Two Souls by Steven Raaymakers. It's book 1 in the aria of Steel, and I haven't read it. I haven't read it because it arrived last week, and I've been up in Wellington at Armageddon selling my book for the past few days. So this is my first opportunity to pick up this book. So let's read it together, shall we? First of all, a big thanks to Steven Raaymakers for allowing me to read a Canticle of Souls here on my YouTube channel, and a big apology to Steven Raaymakers if that's not how you pronounce your name. Let's get into it. Even monsters can walk the path to redemption. Raziel, and I apologize if that's not how you pronounce that as well, is a 14-year-old girl who carries a sentient sword. Alicia is a war child, a person who can control anyone's emotions with a simple glance. United by fate, they set off on a journey of bitter revenge, steeped in blood and scars. The blade is gaining influence over Raziel, while Alicia's powers grow ever stronger. The Empire is on the brink of collapse, desperate in its need to destroy them. The children must overcome their self-doubt and fight back if they hope to survive the journey ahead. Set in a grim world of emotion-based magic and twisted fates, this is the first book in the Aria of Steel trilogy. Love a map. Absolutely love a map. Chapter 1. Death by a Child. The blood on his palms was in that intoxicating stage where it wasn't quite dry, but not wet either. There was a time when only disgust and nausea had accompanied the sight of blood, when the heat of someone's life spilled on his skin had haunted his frantic dreams. However, he had overcome that. It had helped him overcome that. That cursed sword, that lovely sword, that sword which was damn his soul to hell before long, if it hadn't already. A shout rang across the walls, but Raziel only stared at the bodies sprawled on the battlements. The night guard had been a foolish, trusting idiot who had made a mistake from which he would never have a chance to draw a vital lesson. Never trust a stranger with a sword. Even when that person was a 14-year-old boy in filthy rags with ribs showing through pallid skin. Especially not then. Pain shot through his arm, destroying thought and blinding reason. He collapsed to the frozen stone, his face smeared red with the trickling life of the soldier. He clenched his teeth in agony, but rose as it subsided. "Okay, damn it," he said. "I get the message." Torches flickered nearby. He wiped the blood from his eyes, then looked at the keep rising into the night sky, a dark, brooding shape against the moonlit clouds. One light shone in a high window. A frown creased his forehead, deepening with each step. Feet slapping on the cold stone of the wall, Raziel ran toward his enemy, toward his prey. The general sat in his chamber, his heavy, carved desk drowned in papers, a half-eaten dinner precariously balanced on top of one pile, a human skull weighing down another. He wrote in a slow, ponderous manner, the quill like a toothpick in his large, calloused fingers. As he completed the document and signed it, a smile broke on his stern face. The single candle threw light on the suit of armor beside the desk, and his smile faded as he saw dust had settled once again in the crevices in the breastplate, and the Rhotian blue cloth, spattered in black stains, had the telltale grey of cobwebs. He made a mental note to have the maid seen to later as he dropped the quill into the empty inkwell. The door opened, and he turned his head, his jaw clenched as he prepared to admonish whoever dared disturb him. The guard that had been stationed outside his door stumbled into the room, sending the door crashing into the wall as he collapsed, blood darkening the expensive maroon carpet to black. The general's eyes widened, and with a gasp he leapt to his feet, hands slamming on the desk and scattering quills and papers across the carpet. A small figure, hauling a huge sword, entered the room. The general shook his head, struggling to comprehend the fact that the weapon wasn't actually large, but rather that it was wielded by a child. He knew he needed to act, but his thoughts kept circling around that one point, insisting it was all that mattered now, all that he had to know. Then he realized it was the eyes that burned with hatred darker than anything he had seen in any battle. Madness he had only seen in nightmares, and the faces of... yes, that was it. Possessed men. This was no child. This was a demon. Terror shook him free from the unblinking glare. Drawing his sword, he backed away, his training falling naturally into place. Keeping the desk between them was a promising idea until he could call for guards or circle to the door. The demon didn't rush, merely approached step by step, its eyes never leaving his. He felt like laughing, like screaming. The situation was so comical, so deathly frightening. A rough smile formed on his grimacing face even as tears flowed down his cheek and a cry crept up his throat. The figure stopped, its face lit unevenly by the candle that flickered in the draught of the open door. Shadows formed and slid across boyish features, showing hints of the man he was to become before vanishing in a flutter. The play of light and darkness was ever-changing. Only one thing was constant: the eyes. The sword pierced the general's neck before he registered the movement. "Just a child!" his mind screamed as the blade bit deeper. "Just a child!" The blade chinked against his spine, a sound he refused to accept, a sound he had heard too often not to recognize. "Just a child!" His sight faltered, disappeared, all life vanishing in one sharp spurt of pain. Just a child, as Raziel damned his soul to hell. Face splattered with hot death, Raziel forced the blade clean through the neck. The headless corpse staggered for a second, then collapsed to the carpet, now soaked and stained beyond repair. He watched the stains spread, forming shapes and continents as if it was a map of the world. Seas appeared and disappeared, islands grew into countries, continents, worlds. Raziel collapsed, his stomach expelling his last meal. When did I last eat? He couldn't remember. Emotions ripped their way through his heart as his mind blurred with a mess of thoughts and feelings. In the end, it all sank down to a deep, dark throb of pain, terror, and guilt. He grew cold, then hot, feverish in both body and mind. The sword lay by his side. Raziel relished the violence, thrived in it, gripping it and gripped by it like lovers in a passionate embrace. This wasn't love he felt, though, but lust. Lust for death, for hatred, for revenge. As he fed it, it tore him apart. He fought to be free but wouldn't let go, only wanting more and more and more. Laughter echoed through his soul, intensifying with each memory of someone he had killed, mocking the regret he felt, enjoying the clarity of those deaths in his mind, deriding his current state of insanity. Was he mad? Was the pain he felt, the split in his mind and heart, the indecision, the slaughter, was that madness? How could it be when it felt so right, so good? The blade told him that. The laughter came again, mocking his trust. He crushed it down, surprised when it worked. Of course he trusted the sword, and for good reason. It was his savior. More importantly, it was the closest thing to a friend he had. Raziel shook his head, using his arms to lift himself from the floor. He grasped the hilt, caressing it, begging its forgiveness for his doubt. It didn't punish him. It was just. It only hurt him when he needed a lesson or a warning. Raziel whispered his gratitude. His legs failed as he tried to rise, so he lay back, forcing his body to relax. It was only when the blood flowed that he was alive. Like a drug, he depended on it, and when it was taken away he became what perhaps he should have been, a 14-year-old boy with no family, hungry and weak and innocent. That part hurt the most. He had never meant to take this road. He had never wanted to become what he had. He was crying, lying in a pool of a man's lukewarm blood, in rags, feverish, exhausted, and crying. The laughter had returned, and he resigned himself to it. If anything had helped, at least he knew what that was, could understand it. Suddenly, his arms screamed in pain, and he lurched to his knees, gasping in agony, but the pain was short-lived. The moment he heard voices approaching, the sword took control, clearing his mind. He gripped the general's head in one hand. The thoughts of fear and weakness were barely a memory now, perhaps a spell of lightheadedness. He often had those after a kill. Pushing the distracting thoughts out of his mind, he opened the window of the keep and looked out at the cool night. The candle flickered and died in the sudden breeze, leaving him wrapped in the darkness he loved. The voices he had heard were simply guards patrolling the hallways, some still excited by the corpse on the wall below. Belting the sword on his back and gripping the head in one hand, he clambered down the side of the keep, using his feet and fingers to grip the tough ivy and craggy gaps. The fact that he could fall to his death any second only encouraged him, and he smiled widely as he climbed. The smile didn't reach his eyes, though. They remained serious and insane, exactly as the late general had seen them. The market was still mostly empty, the sky still dark with the faintest streaks of the morning sun lighting the horizon. It was drizzling. No one seemed particularly eager to get up any earlier than usual, though one or two of the more enterprising shop owners were beginning to set up their stalls. A guard walked past, ignoring the peddlers, cursing the rain under his breath as he hunched his shoulders and moved toward the shelter of the city gate. The gatekeeper twisted the winch to raise the portcullis, and more sleepy-eyed merchants trickled into the city. The only sounds were the rain, falling straight and flat, and the occasional conversation as people worked. It was like any other morning, until a horse trotted out of a side alley, dragging something on a rope. One of the traders glanced at it, then turned back to his work. He paused, then slowly looked around again, studying the small child riding the horse, his eyes moving down to the object it dragged along. One by one, people stopped working, staring at the general's head. The head of the Victor of Dushan, the legendary dragon who had occupied this city so brutally and viciously 5 months earlier. Someone stumbled backward, knocking a pot of lantern oil to the ground in a crash, shattering the silence. One or two onlookers hurried inside, unsure whether to rejoice or fear for their lives. The rest simply stood, wide-eyed. The rider coughed, a ragged, harsh sound rife with sickness and fever, before speaking in an eerily clear voice. "This man killed my family." The boy's words were simple, his tone high and childish, which somehow made the listeners all the more attentive. "I killed him. I killed the guards on the walls. I burned the garrison." They all remembered the inferno that had happened just last month. "I cannot avenge my family. They are dead. He stopped, shoulders drooping in the quiet rain. His clothes were beyond ragged now, stained with blood and dirt, and barely hanging on his malnourished frame. His bowed head shook a little as he cried. One of the bystanders instinctively stepped forward, but after glancing at the head and the sword which lay across the back of the saddle, he thought better of it. Raziel lifted his tear-filled eyes, staring unseeing as hatred, terror, and pain flashed across his thin face. His lips quivered. "I want them back," he sobbed, clutching at the strips of cloth he wore, trying to cover himself, trying to gain whatever warmth he could. Failing that, he stretched his hand back for the sword, clutching at it in his delirium. He hugged it to his chest and grew silent, None of you understand, do you? You stand there like dumb sheep. What are you looking at? What right do you have to stare? The sword spoke to him, encouraged him. This humiliation. Finish it. Right here. Right now. When the peddlers saw the steel flash and the look in his eyes, they turned to run. One was cut down and stumbled into a stall pole, collapsing the structure and spilling fruit all over the street. Hooves clattered on the wet cobblestones and echoed off the buildings, screams joining the din. The guard at the gate emerged, hand on his sword, as he saw figures scattering in the dim light of the morning, and a small figure on horseback. He rushed forward to take hold of the reins, thinking the young rider had lost control of the creature. The guard saw the flash of metal too late, and his helmeted head flew from his body, slamming against the castle wall with a sickening crash. Raziel turned his steed toward the gate, trusting the blade when it told him to flee. The horse snorted as Raziel dug his heels in, and they flew beneath the portcullis and galloped past surprised guardsmen. He was already far down the road when he heard a shout, followed by a volley of arrows which flew far from the mark. By the time they had knocked new arrows, he was beyond reach, and didn't look back. The wind was fierce in his hair, and rough on his face. The steed galloped well, and Raziel was uneasily proud to have it. Uneasy, because where and how he had procured the beast was a blank in his mind. Darkness cast a shroud over much of the past few weeks. It scared him, and at night he felt that darkness almost like a hunting beast. His eyes would catch movement in the shadows, seeing strange shapes and patterns of light and dark, shapes that seemed unearthly, abnormal, and unnatural. Then he'd blink, and the shapes would be gone, even when he searched for them. The horse jumped over a fallen branch in the road, and the thump jolted Raziel from his thoughts. He didn't like thinking about those things anyway. It was silly, childish, not worthy of one who wielded such a sword for justice. The sword had told him this, the logic of cold steel, the strength of honed metal teaching what no man had ever seemed to understand. Or if they had not shared it with Raziel. After all, they must have thought he was only a boy. But he was so much more, had always been so much more. Pride filled his heart, frigid and hard from the trials he had borne. He touched the sword, feeling its strength, loving the control and respect he received from it. Indeed, he acknowledged that there was no love there, no warmth and no kindness, but those things had been lost with his family, with his mother, his father, his brother. A quick, sharp spike of pain flew up his arm from where his fingers touched the blade. Another small lesson. He winced, bowed his head, and stamped down the weak thoughts. Hatred. Focus on that. Destroy the cause of the pain, and perhaps he could sleep again, could live once more. Until then he would learn and obey. And really he didn't mind not having to think. Sometimes it hurt too much. The sun was cresting the mountain range ahead as he stopped to rest, leading his beast a little off the road, into one of the small forests that lay around Dushan. The land was quite flat here, though crags and gullies became more prominent further along this road. Wide and shallow streams and rivers made it a perfect system for growing crops and farming the land. Not that Raziel had much knowledge of such things. His father had been a leather worker's apprentice, his mother sewing and working with cloth for most of her day. They had never been even comfortable in their life, but they had been happy. Now they were dead, slaughtered by the Rotian general whom he had beheaded last night. That had been such a sweet moment, destroying the very person who had brought him such pain. He still had some of the bastard's blood dried in the creases of his palms. Deep down, the pain was still there. People sometimes likened suffering to a festering wound, at least in the tales he had listened to as a child. But Raziel looked at it as a tree, growing ever stronger, steadier, its roots going deeper, not weakening and killing the person but strengthening them, replacing the weakness with a new resolve, a new strength. Perhaps it was all a matter of perspective. Leaving the horse to graze, he sat down to consider the future. It seemed there was nothing there. He felt sick. Hunger gnawed at him, and his mind was a mess. He hugged the sword to his chest again, relishing the clarity it brought to his thoughts. Some might say Raziel was a fool. All the signs of possession, of absolute control, were so clear. His attachment to the blade was like a Haskir addiction. The most popular drug in Rennis, due to its price, Haskir tricked the users into thinking they could see better, think more rationally, and solve every problem in their lives. Of course, anyone watching would only see a drooling fool staggering about the room and muttering to themselves, before extended use led to their death. Raziel's connection to the sword was much like that, so clear to an observer, but all he saw was the logic, the strength and the release from pain it gave him. The sword did have a spiritual hold on the boy. It was possession, but only in part. The blade didn't need complete control, making it all the stronger as Raziel worked alongside the evil, the two of them slaughtering together and praising each other. The boy leaned against a tree, eyes closed in the pale sunlight, the rain drying up as the day began. He wasn't thinking any longer, merely sitting there. Sometimes that was all he wanted, to sit there forever, forget about everything, to do nothing but listen to the wind and the leaves, the insects and birds, living in the trees and grass, the sound of a stream somewhere deeper in the forest, and his own heartbeat. An hour or two later, guards rode past on the road. But the sleeping boy didn't wake. The sword knew the trees and bushes concealed them, and didn't disturb him. A few seconds later all was quiet again, all except the nightmares raging through Raziel's exhausted mind. Flames roared through the small building, drowning out the screams and crashing of falling beams. Raziel stumbled down the burning stairs, leaping off as they collapsed. He wasn't sure if this was dream or memory, or perhaps a bit of both. Whatever the case, he knew this was his family's house. If he went outside, he would find his parents and brother slaughtered. He didn't want to, would rather die than see that again, but the heat pushed him forward relentlessly, and his foolish legs moved him through the charred door. He collapsed on the street just as the house crashed down behind him. The bodies lay there, washed in a red light that added to the scarlet staining their clothes and the street around them. He cried, but the tears didn't blur his vision, and his eyes wouldn't close. Why do I have to see this again? Why do my dreams insist on repeating this horror? He looked around for the soldiers, the damned Rotian soldiers who had done this. He looked down and laughed with true pleasure. He had his sword, and yes, there were the guards. They were pointing at him, shouting. Maybe they wanted to finish the slaughter of an innocent working family. Well, Raziel was about to show them what such workers could do. Everything turned into a black and red haze, only the screams and roaring of the flames echoing in his mind, then pure darkness. Sweat drenched his sleeping body, mixing into the rain-damp rags and chilling him. He woke, shivering uncontrollably, then spotted the horse blanket rolled up behind the horse's saddle. With shaking hands he untied it and stripped off the old clothes, rolling himself in the warmth and softness. Something at the back of his mind told him he should unsaddle the animal and let it rest, but his fever drowned that out as well, once more into oblivion. This time there were no nightmares. Alright, so that was Chapter 1 of A Canticle of Two Souls. Whew! Dang, that goes hard. It starts off really quick. What's that first line? The blood on his palms was in that intoxicating stage where it wasn't quite dry but not wet either. As many of you know, I'm sure it's very important to have a hook on your first line. Right when someone starts reading the book, and that is an excellent example, if the map hasn't already got you going, got the reader salivating. Absolutely really cool. Some awesome traditional fantasy elements in there, and obviously a lot of a unique approach to storytelling in there as well. Really like the open and clear, direct, this is an unreliable narrator approach. That's really cool. We get to really see into the mind of a person who doesn't understand what's going on themselves, but is nonetheless trying to tell you the story, or is at least the prospective protagonist. That's really cool. So Steven is a independent Aotearoa author. I will, of course, leave links in the description to where you can purchase A Canticle of Two Souls and look at Steven's other work. And I'll also leave links to social media and all that sort of stuff in the description below as well. As always, thank you very much for watching and listening, everyone. If you like this video, please consider leaving a like. If you want to see more like this video, please subscribe, ring the bell, and if you have any suggestions for books I might read in the future, if you want to talk about A Canticle of Two Souls, or if you would like me to read your book, please go ahead and comment below. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.